button. Behind the blue curtain. Live here. Check over on our YouTube, and we're live on YouTube. Excellent. Zoom in a little bit. Hit this button. Hello and welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're finally going to talk about Across the Spider-Verse because I was able to see it. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games. But in this instance, we're talking about multiverse movies for like the fourth one in a row. This movie came out obviously about a month ago. But you know, we just kind of had to get through some chaff in order to get here. And it makes for I am actually really glad in a certain sense that we waited, because it makes for a fascinating sort of capstone on this sort of grouping of multiverse movies, right? And in particular, a companion piece to The Flash, right? Both of which I think are movies that handle the multiverse content. I guess this is me sort of giving a little bit of my reaction. Both of these movies handle the multiverse concept really well, right? Like I talked about in my last one how I had this metaphysical issue with these multiverse movies, and we'll talk about some of the specifics of that. But I actually think that even though both movies kind of went on honestly like orthogonal, like diametrically opposed sorts of viewpoints.
I would say it's not orthogonal. They are like directly in contrast, right? Like,
yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, like they are. But it's interesting that I think that they both make for a compelling argument and structure themselves well around the sort of the multiverse conceit. And so I'm very interested.
Yeah,
in all of that.
Yeah. So for as it's just we're giving our pre spoiler impressions. And I think this movie was great, especially animation wise, right? Like that is the biggest thing, right? Like this is a beautiful movie. Apparently, to the detriment of the animators, right? Like apparently this next, like they are already crunching on the sequel, which is bad news. So hopefully that doesn't keep going in that direction, but who knows? But it's absolutely beautiful. They do a lot of very cool things. Like basically every character has their own distinct art style commingling on screen at the same time. I think a danger of a lot of these kind of like multiverse shenanigan movies is like a, point and because I saw it type deal, which happened in basically all of these movies. I feel like it was relatively well done here. It wasn't terrible, right? There were a couple of moments that were a little bit cringe, but like most of it was like, was fine, right? I'm sure, like you, Buddy, got a lot more out of this than I did because I recognize some of these characters. Most of them I did not. But it's a neat idea. And I think there's I had a literal fridge moment about half an hour ago when I was opening my fridge to grab something for dinner, and I was like, wait. But upon further reflection, I'll go into that in the spoiler section, but I think most of it can be explained away in particular ways, so I'm not too concerned about it. And again, I said this during the Flash movie. Anytime bullshit happens with a time movie, I'm willing to let most of that go, right?
Yeah.
And there's definitely a little, it's not time, it's multiverse, but similar thing, right?
So, yeah. Alternate universe shenanigans, right?
Yeah.
Like all of that stuff. Yeah, I'm in a very similar spot. I think really what I sort of ended up explaining sort of haphazardly about the Flash was that I have this sort of approach that is, if the multiverse is used on a thematic and a character level rather than just like a plot level, I'm much more in tune with it, right? I can forgive it a lot more. And I think a lot of my frustration, I talked about like the metaphysical problem of these multiverse movies. To be fair, the metaphysical problem is in this movie and in it in a way that I don't particularly love, but it's just kind of overpowered, right? This is not a movie that is like good because it has the absence of bad. It is good because there is so much more good than bad. If that makes sense, right? I am kind of willing to forgive it its whatever moral sins, like moral philosophy sins, because it's in service to a pretty good story, like an individual kind of character, an individual character level. The one thing I will say is that, unfortunately, Into the Spider-Verse is better. I think that movie is way better than this one, which is sort of not. That's not meant to be too damning, right? Because I think it's better in the same way that, the Matrix is better than Reloaded, if that makes sense. I've used this metaphor before, right? How when things are transcendently, like, so insanely good, it's really hard for the sequel to like live up to that hype. And I try and be pretty permissive about that sort of thing. But this is just another in a long line of that kind of tradition, right? I think that Into the Spider-Verse was tighter, it was cleaner, the emotional arc was way more satisfying, and I generally liked the interaction between the characters more so than I like the interactions here. So this is kind of an A- movie coming after A+ movie. That makes sense.
Yeah, no,
Hello, Bruce Lil Wayne. Hey, how's it going? Welcome.
but yeah. No, I generally agree with you. Part of it is this is like, the first part of a 2-part movie, right? Like,
Yeah.
And to your point too, right? That this happens with the Matrix as well. Although the counterpoint is obviously Empire is, at least to my mind, the best of the Star Wars OT. But I agree with
That's
you.
a tough one. Have we thought about that?
We have.
I think Empire and A New Hope are really good.
Yeah, no, I mean, I also like. I think Return of the Jedi is the weakest of the original trilogy. So there's that. But like to your point, like part of this is going to be how the third movie lands it, right?
Yeah.
Part of it is it's building on the thing, and I think the thing that you are pointing to is like, I actually think this movie is probably more visually impressive than the previous movie, but it is marginally more visually impressive. Whereas like Into the Spider-Verse was like groundbreaking, right? Like you said, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're going from 0 to 100, and now this movie maybe pushes it to 110, right? Like,
Yeah.
And that's even arguable. But I have not seen Into the Spider-Verse in a while, but I don't remember the visual style stuff being as striking or as good. So there's that. But Bruce Lil Wayne is telling us, giving us some advice.
That's actually pretty funny.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Bruce Lil Wayne has informed us that the live tag makes it look like our logo is "Come Derps Play Games," which honestly, that's a pretty good tagline for us, I think.
Yeah, I'm not mad about that tagline. All things considered, it's like you're calling in, right? Like, come Derps play games,
yeah.
right? Even though we're talking about Into the Spider-Verse, right? Can I just ask, why did you call this Lucy in the Sky with Spiders?
Because the Beatles movie Across the Universe, which is also a Beatles song, right? So Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Lucy in the Sky. It's just what popped into my head, and I go with like,
I understand Across the Universe, Across the Spider-Verse, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, okay. Yeah. I understand the chain now, right? Like, there's a little chain.
Follow my autism, right?
Like, yeah. Okay. Are we good for spoiler stuff? Do you want to say anything more?
Here's your spoiler warning for Across the Spider-Verse, also probably Into the Spider-Verse.
Month-old movie.
Yeah. Yes. So here's a spoiler warning. If you haven't seen Across the Spider-Verse, I'd say go watch it yourself, right? Like, I don't think it's so spoilable a movie that it's a huge deal if you listen to us beforehand, but I think on the balance, I would watch it before listening to this if I had the means to, if that makes sense. Do you agree with that?
I guess I'd probably agree. This is definitely not a movie that I think is like super, protected or harmed by spoilers in either kind of way, right? But I bet you're gonna have a better time with it if you don't come into. I also think just like being able to kind of like see it on your own terms on that like kind of character thematic level, works.
All right.
Yeah.
So there's your spoiler warning. All right, let's hop into it. What do you want to get into for. So I've got a thing brimming off the top of my head that I
Sure,
kind of got.
hit me.
All right, I
Yeah,
talked
let's
to
go.
to you a little bit before the podcast. This is basically the same plot as the Loki show, right? Like, TVA. I know you haven't finished it. So actually, spoilers for the Loki show because this is a big spoiler for the Loki show. Basically, the TVA is doing the same thing, and Kang is fulfilling the same role as Miguel. But he's not called. He's called like the Time Master or something, or like the Man at the End of Time or something. But it's Kang. It's played by Jonathan Majors. It's supposed to be the same character, and the resolution of that show is what causes kind of the inciting incident in the rest of the Marvel universe.
Okay.
The thing that's obviously weird about that is that they're co-universal, right? Like explicitly, this like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Across the Spider-Verse happen in the same universe, right? They reference Peter Parker. They show clips from the other two Spider-Man movies, right? So basically, they are the same thing is the same plot is happening in both. And I think there are two ways that this can go. One of which is what I expect, and one of which could happen, and I think will be really bad. The way I think it will happen, and I hope it happens, is that they just ignore it and don't pay attention to it. The way that's bad that could happen is that they explain what happened to Miguel as being the result of the TVA. It's like the Man at the End of Time scrubbing Miguel from his timeline. Because like that is consistent with what the TVA does, right? They prune timelines, they prune branches of the timeline.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be bad. Well, it's interesting because like even though Miguel is sort of the villain here, the
Right.
real villain in the chat Spot was also very similar to Joker from the Lego Batman movie. That's true, right? Like Spot is the villain in the sense of he is the person who most matches onto like the villain archetype in a superhero story,
Sure.
right? Miguel is the antagonist, and I feel like uncoupling those is something legitimately clever that Across the Spider-Verse does, right?
Yeah.
You know, you kind of are setting up this super powerful villain as the Spot will end up kind of being for this third movie, and Miguel is the one who is really standing in Miles's way over the course of this movie.
And
And that's kind of an interesting thing because Kang is very consciously both villain and antagonist, right?
Yeah. And just as a point there, this lets you essentially redeem Miguel, right? If they choose to do that. Whereas the Spot is just a bad dude, right? Like this is what we were talking about with like Guardians 3, right? Like the villain is just a villain that is evil, right? Like you don't have to be sympathetic with him. Whereas Miguel, we can be sympathetic for, and he ultimately has some consequences coming to him, but it's not as big a deal if he, he's understandable. Whereas the Spot is the guy doing the actual bad shit.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the metaphysical problem, right?
right?
The thing that I had explained before is that like this is turning the universes into this like infinite trolley problem, which I think is pretty boring and bad in general, right? And it's kind of one of those things where like just being able to sit down and have a conversation about it would sort of settle things, right? Like but maybe a better way to frame this would be like if you could do the science, right?
Yeah.
They all generally seem to agree and have the same similar sort of ethics. It is just that Miguel has convinced all of the Spider-Man across all of the multiverses, right? That anomalies are really bad and cause the destruction of universes, but he really only seems to have correlative data to support that hypothesis. And now Miles is challenging that assumption for the first time and insisting that no, actually we can recover, and that like we shouldn't let these things we shouldn't let these bad things happen. Just because sort of the fate of the universe sort of says so, if this sort of makes sense. I think all this stuff typically sucks and is bad, but the thing that makes it work here is that it is very intimately tied into the stakes of who Miles is and what he's fighting for as a literal outcast among the spider people, right? A point that gets made that I actually really loved, and I thought that this was incredibly clever, is that Miles is the first anomaly. Like he is a true anomaly, right? There are not alternate Mileses in other universes because he took the spider from Universe 42 and got bit by that spider, which is an anomalous thing that doesn't normally happen, right? Which explains why all of these Spider-Man, all of these Peter Parkers, and obviously everyone who maps onto the Spider-Man persona, whether it's Miguel, whether it's the Jessica Drew, right, Spider-Woman, whether it's Hobie Brown, right? All of them are faded in some way, and it's only the person who's not faded that can kind of see through the ruse and kind of break the illusion. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. I've got a couple of things about that. First thing I want to do is I want to shout out again Bruce Lil Wayne in the chat, pointing out that all of the inner circle for Miguel are like non-Spider Bite Spider-Man, which is interesting. That's
That is actually true. Yeah.
that's a pretty cool. That's probably got what's it called, implications for the sequel. I'm sure people will be doing theory crafting about that, but this was part of my fridge moments. So I can't remember if I said it here or if I said it to you before the cast, but I literally had a fridge moment with this. And again, I think there's a couple ways this could go. Given that Miles is this is pure plot stuff, right? This is not like, substantive criticism, but given that Miles is a anomaly, then there are two things. One, given that Miles is an anomaly, basically means that the canon rules shouldn't need to apply to him, right? Like if he's like, why does his dad have to die since he's not
right?
Like,
yes.
Yeah. And then the other half of this too is like, I think this is just like a visual language thing. I think like him standing over the Prowler dying was supposed to be his Uncle Ben moment as a canon moment, but it was so close temporally to them explaining the captain thing that I was like, wait, didn't they just explain he already had his captain moment? It was his uncle. And so I think that's just like bad. Like, I think that's just like confused storytelling. But the second one, I think again, two ways to resolve this. The good way, or the bad way rather, is this is the loophole, right? This is why it doesn't apply to him, which I think is bad, right? Because I think the movie wants to stand on the kind of like as opposed to the Flash, which wants to stand on things like you sometimes you need to make hard choices. The Spider-Man, I think, wants to stand for the proposition that, like, it's essentially the Matrix proposition, right? Like, you are in control of your own fate. Don't let anybody tell you what you can and cannot do. And so, I really hope they don't try and use that to wiggle out of it. And I feel like they maybe did that because, like, towards the end of the movie, Gwen's dad quits being a cop, and like that seems to be his way out of being it, which is like way too technical for, I think, what the vibes of this movie is going for. Bruce Lewin in the chat also suggests that Uncle Ben and Captain Steph are supposed to be two different canon moments, which I get. I just, when they were doing the line out, I wasn't I wasn't sure, because they had I believe when they go through the holograms, right? The hologram they show is Indian Spider-Man. I cannot remember how to pronounce his name. Standing over Captain Singh, and I believe him standing over his uncle is in that same shot, which confuses matters.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that is like just like a visually confusing detail, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I think my guess is that they wanted that to be the Uncle Ben moment, but they just like lacked the budget or like the animation time to like make that clear or whatever.
Yeah, I also think that this is part of what makes it work, right? Because the thing about the Flash that I think works is the Flash very clearly demonstrates through like film language, right? The devastation that he is causing by trying to, force essentially a square universe in a spherical universe whole, right? You know what I mean? And you get this like tremendous, you see with your own eyes, and he learns in front of your eyes that, oh, there is some real damage being done here, right? That I can't do this. And the thing that I need to learn is I need to learn that I can't just redo it. I have to sacrifice, right? I have to sort of own that failure and that heartbreak, and that's okay, right? Spider-Verse has one crucial detail that's a tiny bit different, which is that Miguel insists that things are this way. So it is much more a story about authority and rebellion, right? Something bad happens. Miguel explains that the bad thing happened because of this other thing, but like we don't actually know that there's a causal relationship there, right? Like it could just be a correlation, right? which is sort of what I'm suggesting. And then obviously Miles is the one who is rebelling against that authority, and the message here is more about like, just because somebody tells you something doesn't mean that you can't, challenge them. And we all presume obviously that Miguel is right, and I'm sorry, Miles is right and Miguel is wrong, and that you will be able to change these canon moments, and his understanding of the canon moments is somehow like flawed in some way, which is part of what I mean about like the science and the conversation, right? Like if Miles and Miguel could just like sit down and have a proper conversation about this and explain their points of view to one another and kind of point out that sort of fallacy underlying Miguel's thought process, theoretically speaking, you could envision a way in which there's no fighting at all. They all just kind of like understand one another, right?
Yeah,
But we're not in that sort of movie.
I'm actually, I am sure there's going to be a moment like that in the second movie, which is when all the Spider-Men are going to change their minds and join, Miles instead
Yeah.
of Miguel.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
but
so both of those movies. Oh, I'm sorry.
I would say, like, you mentioned that's like a small detail. The bigger detail, which I think is the thing that like makes this like plot wise possible, is that there's no time travel in this movie, right? Whereas
True.
like the Flash is time travel, so you can iterate, right, and you can show. And I obviously on our cast about the Flash criticized what I thought was like that it didn't actually do enough work to convince me that was correct, but that's besides the point. I think the other interesting thing that this movie does is that the clear thing is that no, like Miles is the first one, at least that we know of, and I expect this is true of everyone. Is the first Spider-Man that we know of that knows about the canon moment before it happens, right? Like, like they don't tell Indian Spider-Man that Captain Singh's supposed to die, right? They intentionally hide it from him, right? And everybody else has their moment happen. And so like the moral point that Miles is making is kind of it's kind of intuitively correct, which is, you can't, like, it is one thing if you don't know what's going to happen, but if you know it's going to happen and you attempt to, and you don't attempt to prevent it, you're being a bad person, right? Like, which is kind of, this is like the classic kind of like, like you said, this is a cosmic trolley problem type thing, right?
Allowing harm versus doing harm,
Right,
right? Are
right.
those two things the same thing? Is there a difference?
Yeah, well, not only that, but like it's also kind of like, doing the safe thing because it's what is, it is the thing to do rather than striving to do the best that you can do, right? This is kind of a classic story, and to your point, it works because we are not sure of the end results, whereas the Flash tries to demonstrate to us that we are sure of the end result. So I agree with you.
Yeah, the Flash demonstrates very clearly the results, which is why, and it makes it completely, I described it as orthogonal, and really what I was describing is that they are framing it in very different ways, even if they are making the directly oppositional point, right? The Flash says sometimes you just need to accept that bad things happen, right? That fate, it's sort of about fate, right? Some things are fated to happen, and that sucks, and you have to deal with them like an adult, basically, right? That's the Flash. And then across the Spider-Verse is you can change your fate, right? And you shouldn't surrender to it, essentially, right? But the different ways that they're framed, I think, have this coincidental thing where I think both of these movies make very good points and sort of support their points in interesting kind of cosmological, metaphysical, like, kind of ways, even if really what I'm connecting to is the personal journey, right? Like the thing that sells me on all of this stuff isn't actually the metaphysics underpinning all of it. It is the character stuff underpinning it, right? Where Miles is he's not just a Spider-Man chafing under the authority of Miguel and rebelling against that. He's also a teenager chafing under the authority of his parents. And the theme of the movie is very much about like, take a leap of faith, let him spread his wings, right? And so all of that is really what stitches kind of this stuff together in my mind and makes it good, compared to something that's like a multiverse movie, like No Way Home, that I didn't like because I don't think it does that work. I think No Way Home is a little too interested in sort of I don't want to say like spectacle. It's kind of spectacle.
Yeah, it's a fan
Just in
service.
kind yeah, in the fan service, in just sort of the base level plot stuff. And it's not actually using the multiverse to make I actually think it's using the multiverse to make a pretty bad point, right? The idea like this is and which is what I complained about, right? That like, oh, well, actually Peter Parker could just fix everything, given enough time in a high school is like chemistry. It's like, no, that's a really shitty sort of underpinning theme to that movie and how it sort of works. But in the pantheon of all of this multiverse stuff, it's interesting that these two came out basically right on top of each other. And I think that they both use the multiverse in a good way. The other multiverse movie I would think, by the way, that uses the multiverse well is Everything Everywhere All at Once,
Yeah.
right? Which obviously won the Oscar, won Best Picture, and everything like that. But that's probably right, like one of the best versions of a multiverse movie because the entire thing is this extended metaphor for kind of the weight of the choices that we make individually, right? And how they affect other people in sort of like a butterfly effect kind of like phenomenon, right? But it's like rooted in the drama of this small family, and the relationships that the family has to one another. So it's kind of like I think like that's clever, just kind of like on its face. So these are like in my mind, these are the big three multiverse movies, and they work for that set of reasons.
I agree. I mean, you are missing the other big multiverse movie, which is Multiverse of Madness, which was bad. So like that is
No, to
uncontroversially
be
bad.
clear, I'm saying big three like good
Okay, yeah.
multiverse movies, right?
Um,
Multiverse of Madness was bad. Spider-Man No Way Home was bad. There's another one that I was thinking, but I can't remember what it was.
so I'm less harsh on No Way Home than you, and I'm also more harsh on Flash than you. But like, just kind of
That's true.
to round those out, like Multiverse of Madness doesn't effectively use that mechanic, right? Or like, if I'm going to be charitable, the multiverse stuff is like a side plot device. It is not the main focus of it, which is which which makes it run much more like a conventional movie. Whereas No Way Home's problem, and I think there's just a problem with like any of these things is like the plot for a lot of these movies, especially if you could pull someone out of a specific point in time, is the plot the issue with No Way Home is that the plot is always we can fix it, and the answer always has to kind of be like no you can't, right? And that's generally deeply unsatisfying. Or you could do No Way Home and say yes you can, except maybe there's a little bit of a consequence or something, right? Like, which is why No Way Home is not great. So I think that's the sum total of that that particular stuff. But we've gone on a lot about like the multiverse physics of this movie
Yeah.
on kind of like basic level stuff, right? Like, how did you feel about the characters, the other stuff in this movie? All that.
Before we get out, I just want to answer a question in
Oh.
the chat. Did Miguel destroy Peter B. Parker's universe? No. So we see Peter B. Parker's universe later on when he goes and he talks to like MJ and he gets like recruited by Gwen into this like team of Spider-Men who are gonna go rescue Miles in the end and all that other sort of stuff. But I do understand because there was a part where Miguel leaned on Peter B. Parker in order to convince Miles of the importance of canon stuff, right? So anyway, I just interrupt you. What did
Just
you
like
say?
what other things? What like we talked a lot about like the metaphysics of the movie. Is there?
Oh, right. Yes. So some of the other stuff. One of the other things I just want to talk about is the ending, right? So I think this is the other thing that really steals the satisfaction, and drives across the universe down a little bit for me, which was that um it ends on a cliffhanger that I think is clever in a sense, right? Like he gets sent to the wrong universe, which I don't like, but um or not which I don't like, which I do like. I think that that's clever, but it's like it ups the stakes. It's bad, right? He wants to go home and he is now stranded in this other universe without a Spider-Man, right? Um but I am also interested, I guess I would say, um, in the setup, and I feel like it doesn't deliver. I feel like this movie doesn't work up to its cliffhanger ending compared to, I would say, for instance, Fast X, which I thought, it had a cliffhanger ending, but I was kind of fine with it because it just worked up to it in a way that I found reasonably satisfying and I was kind of on board with, compared to this where I was like, wait, really? Oh, okay. It was kind of a little anticlimactic and a little bit of a letdown. Does that make sense? How did you feel about all that?
I figured it was gonna cut. Like I had several moments where I was like, it's gonna cut here, right? It's gonna get here, right? And then,
Did you know that it was going to cut?
oh yeah. No, I knew going into it was gonna cut.
Maybe that's the honestly, maybe that's the issue because in Fast X I knew they were going to cut somewhere. We knew it was part 1 of 2, right? In
you didn't know it
Across
was.
the Spider-Verse, I did not. I
Yeah,
had no
I
idea.
knew it was.
I mean, I knew that Beyond the Spider-Verse was like obviously I knew that it got greenlit for the sequel. But I didn't know that it was going to end on such an obvious kind of cliffhanger.
Oh, I didn't even know. I thought it was gonna be Across the Spider-Verse Part 1 and Part 2. I knew that this was gonna be a 2-part movie. Like I think before it came out, or at least that was my impression. Maybe I inappropriately absorbed that somewhere, but you know, I'm just a shout out Lou in the chat. Kids shouldn't fuck with the multiverse. I don't like. I do think the important thing here is that there's no time travel element, which is the thing. It's the place where you really have to kind of like, you have to say it doesn't work, because if it works, then you just go fix everything, and there's no plot anymore. That or the plot is just like dealing with the problems.
Or, you know, I mean, I do think that there have been other time travel movies that have answered this question satisfactorily, right? In the sense that, so for instance, time travel movies, huh? Maybe I can't think of a good example of this. Well, so but my philosophy is that there are time travel movies where you fix things, but they go wrong anyway. And the reality is that you can never make a perfect universe, right? Things will always go wrong. Things will always be bad. No matter how many times you iterate, you're never going to make it perfect, right? I can't think of a good example of this off the top of my head. Maybe there's like comics with that, you know, or something kind of along those sorts of lines. But I would get on board with that as sort of like a version of time travel where you could embrace the ability to change the past and fix things and change them around or whatever, without, you know,
Yeah,
committing yourself to an infinite project of iterative whatever.
right. I mean, the answer is you get it good enough and then you don't care anymore, right? Which is the Back to the Future answer, right?
Finally, yeah, Bruce Llewellyn in the chat. Final Destination, I think, is a good example. Perfect. It's not explicitly time travel, but it is exactly the phenomenon I'm trying to get across, right? This idea that, you know, even if you do sort of cheat death, right, it'll kind of catch up with you. That's pretty similar to what I'm getting.
Yeah, no, I mean, so the interesting thing is like the other archetype movie is like the standard archetype is denying fate, right? Like,
right.
And that happens a lot. It's just weird because it's like like the multiverse puts like a kind of like this time travel-esque spin on it, right? Like it's causing this to collide, but like denying your fate is like that's like, again, that's the Matrix. That's like a classic movie trope, right? You are not tied to your fate, right? And that's basically what this movie is. It's just in a multiverse, and that's the issue, right? Like so I don't know. This might be like one of those weird things where like basically Back to the Future ruined it for everyone, because like there are a bunch of think pieces written about how like actually Marty's living in a horrible kind of like new future where he doesn't actually know his parents because they're different people than the ones that he grew up with, type of deal, right? Like so like maybe somebody like every aspiring film writer read those think pieces and is like, well, I guess we can't do fix the past things anymore.
By the way, the thing I'm thinking of is Edge of Tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that is a movie that has time travel and that is iterative, but the point of the movie is not to like, it is to thread the needle, and there are sort of the threats, and you have to accept, you know what I mean? Like
he doesn't have arbitrary time power, right? This is like this is like the time loop. This is a different type of movie, time loop movie, right? Groundhog Day. I haven't seen the Andy Samberg one, but I believe you have, right?
Palm Springs.
Edge of Tomorrow, right? These are all kind of like time loop movies where like it's about achieving an objective, like getting a perfect roguelike run, right?
Yes. Yeah, that is a great example of it. There's another one I think called Source Code, which I'm pretty sure is about this. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, but yes, we should talk a little bit more about like the actual.
Yeah, we're getting sucked into the multiverse of this podcast, you guys.
Yeah. This podcast, which has an alternate universe podcast about food that crosses over every April. You remember?
interesting in the chat. Across the Spider-Verse ending reminded me so much of the ending of Pirates 2. It was deflating of all of the excitement that was built. I feel that. Even though I'm a Pirates 2 enjoyer, I quite like the Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest with like the God, what the fuck is his name? Davy
Davy
Jones.
Jones.
Davy Jones is so cool and iconic, and I actually think that movie is a really fun adventure. But I would absolutely agree that ending is a letdown, right? I think the thing that makes this one feel like a letdown is the lack of. It doesn't set me up for. And I think what I'm getting at is a little bit of like what makes a good cliffhanger. I think the reason that I connected with the Fast X cliffhanger is because you see it in this thing of I can't wait to see how they solve this, right? Where it is creating a certain level of sort of these stakes, right? um the crew is in an airplane that just gets shot down by the secret twist reveal villain bad guy. Dom's brother dies in a blaze of glory. It's just Dom and his kid, right? Letty and Cypher are stuck in Antarctica, but then there's a sub that it's just like all of that is simultaneously like enticing, and it sets me up for like, oh, I need to know what happens sort of next. I didn't really get that feeling, to be honest with you. In Across the Spider-Verse, I guess maybe because like it didn't set itself up for what's next in enough of a satisfying way, right? Like the Spot is technically a villain who we know will be in Beyond the Spider-Verse, right? And we've seen some sort of like premonition-y level stuff of what he intends to do and how he's probably going to end up maybe killing Miles's dad. We don't know. But you don't really see the Spot. It's not like the Spot is having a direct confrontation with Miles right before the cliffhanger, right? He's just kind of a loose end that is not being taken care of, right? Similarly, you have Miguel and the spiders trying to track down Miles, but they're looking in the wrong universe, and it's Gwen who realizes, oh, actually he's in this other universe. I'm gonna get like the gang together. Maybe that's the most interesting part of the puzzle, but like that gang doesn't really do any, like they don't really do anything, and it doesn't leave me with that level of like hope, I guess. I don't know, it's just like that this is the stuff that sort of deflated the ending to me.
Yeah. So Luce in the chat, did the Marvel movie not have stakes again? It has stakes. It's just like it's one of those things where like the stakes are like super well established, but like it's not like necessary to traverse the intermediate part to get like the stakes are going to happen in 2 days, right? Like they're not directly tied to the actions that end this movie, right?
Right, yeah, that's actually exactly the point, right?
Right, yes.
It is the thing that happened in Fast X is you watch the plane with all of these characters you love get shot out of the sky, right? Right before the cliffhanger happens, right? It is an immediate thing, right? There's no immediacy, I feel like, to what happens in Across the Spider-Verse, which I think is really what I might be describing,
Yeah.
right?
And it's also one of those things where like you don't like it's not like there's a lot to figure out, like how do they get, like, what's the explanation. It's not like, because like what the resolution of the Fast X trilogy will ultimately be is, right, it's like not known yet, right? Yeah. We know essentially what is going to happen in the next Spider-Verse movie. They're going to stop Spot from dropping a building on Captain Morales, right? Or like, some variation of that. And so that can like, there's like, it's like if I I could write the Wikipedia summary for the 2 movies kind of right now. And like the middle paragraph that describes like the main plot of, Beyond the Spider-Verse is like just kind of like filler almost, or like it can kind of slide into that slot, right? Like it might feel like it'll probably be fine. It'll probably be good, but like it doesn't have like the anticipation building that you want it to.
Yeah, it's sort of like I almost want to say there's kind of a prophecy. Maybe I would call it like the prophecy problem or something like that, right? Which is that like whenever a movie prophesizes something, right? You walking into it what's going to happen kind of next,
Right.
right? Because it has to adhere somehow to the prophecy. And I think prophecies are fun and interesting, but they're fun and interesting in kind of like the Game of Thrones way, right? Where like you have multiple different ways, right? When we learn that um Azor Ahai, right, in universe there's a prophecy about him, he's going to be the one to kill the Night King or whatever, right? And fans can have these arguments about like, oh, I think Jamie is going to be Azor Ahai and he fits these characteristics. Oh, I think Tyrion is Azor Ahai and he fits these characteristics. I think John, I think Danny, right? Like you can kind of have these sort of like competing interpretations of what sort of the prophecy means. But the thing is that in this movie they literally just show it to you, right? They show the spot. He goes to New York and he drops a building on Miles's dad. That happens, right? Which kind of locks you in a very narrow way.
Yeah.
Fast X has no prophecy. There's no prophecy. There's also, by the way, no source material, right? They could do whatever they want because like they're making these movies up as they go. Whereas Spider-Man, you know, is inherently this borrowed property with all of this history and all this other sort of stuff, and is explicitly about the canonicity of these events, right? Of you know, the importance or whatever of the death of the police captain. So it's just like that's I feel like that's what makes these two different. One of them is truly unpredictable in a way that, you know, even in like even Fast X, knowing the way that movie is like set up, Jason Momoa is the son of the guy from the fifth movie and he's out for revenge. I had no idea what any of the plot points in that movie were going to be walking into that, right? Maybe the only one I could have predicted is Jason Momoa and Dom have a confrontation and taunt one another, right? In a place where they can't just kill each other with guns, right? Like, I don't know. So that's, I feel like what helps differentiate them kind of on that level as well.
Oof. Bruce Lil Wayne, can't believe all the No Way Home slander followed up by all this FNF support. I can tell you're a new fan, because we have, if you would like to hear our thoughts on the Fast and Furious franchise, we did all 10 movies.
We did all
Like the
10
past
movies,
3
yeah.
months.
This is true. I am, by the way, I am definitely a No Way Home. I apologize for that. It's just that movie hit me really in the wrong way. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think part of it is that to catch you up a little. This is our this is our like last time on some Derps talking about games, episode 300, right? Instead of 363 or whatever the number is. My thing about No Way Home is I really, really love those Sam Raimi movies. And I got this thing about No Way Home where it felt like it felt like a personal betrayal, right? That he was able to just control Doc Ock's arms with nanites, right? Oh, I can just fix this by installing a new chip in your brain. Oh, I can just fix you by, you know, reverse engineering the thing that turned you into the Green Goblin. That stuff really bothered me because it kind of like undercuts what makes those movies
Sing.
I guess good.
Yeah. But just back to your point about the kind of the stakes thing. I've been marinating on this while you were talking. Just like, I think part of it too is like, there's like not a lot to like theory craft about, right? Like, we know, again, this is the Wikipedia point, right? The gang is going to figure out that he's in Universe 42, and they're going to go get him, and like that is, and like, you know, there are going to be details there that will be visually stunning and interesting, but like it's not like there's a lot there, right? Like, also we know that like the puzzle pieces are all there, right? Like we know it's their essential plan of action, right? Like, because, and like we know that they know what universe he was supposed to come from, right? Like they say, you know, Universe 42, that's like a big thing. They show Universe 42 on the thing, right? Like, you know, I was that supposed to be like was that moment supposed to be a pull for the audience? Because I kind of knew immediately that what was happening with the plot when that happened, right? Like,
yeah, no, but I think that's dramatic irony. I also knew immediately. I also think this movie's a little bit for kids.
Yeah,
I think like that's the kind of thing that you and me are going to catch. But like when a 12-year-old, I bet 10 kids all watch that movie. One of them caught it, and he's going to feel like a god for the day.
Yeah,
you know, like
fair.
that kind of thing. So
that's fair. That's fair. I do forget that these movies are for children sometimes. Bruce Lilwayne in the chat says Gwen knows that he is in 42, right? Theoretically, she hasn't said it yet. Like this is the thing that will annoy me if they can't figure it out, right? It's going to be like, you should know this, right? Type of deal. Like too stupid. Yeah. This is the thing we've talked about. Like when it's too stupid, it bothers me. Like there's a limit. Like I'm willing to like, suspend disbelief, but like
Yep.
Gwen really should know. Miguel should definitely know. Like you could farm some tension off of that, right? Like Miguel beats them to the punch because he knows and they have to like figure it out or something, or like they can't, she can't dial in her wristwatch to the. I guess she can't. We know that she can dial in her wristwatch really easily because she kind of does that with Hobie's Jank wristwatch.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you want to talk about Gwen? I thought Gwen is the other thing that's a big pillar supporting this movie, which is she has a really compelling story. I'm a big fan of everything they were doing with kind of Gwen and her dad, mostly because I think I'm just so starved for secret fucking identities in these superhero movies. It's crazy to me. I think of the secret identity as an incredibly important pillar of any superhero movie, show, property, whatever, right? So much time and effort in the comics gets spent on maintaining secret identities, right? But kind of for the last like 15 years, maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to think. The Dark Knight has like worries a lot about secret identities. That was 2008. I just feel like secret identities have not been an important part of
yeah. So part of it is that the end of Iron Man 1, not Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark comes out and says, "I am Iron Man," right? Like,
oh yeah. Yep, true.
And subverts the trope, right? Which was innovative at the time, but we've had like you said, like 15 years of fucking Marvel movies, right? Like more than that, right? Because Iron Man was like 2006 or so, maybe. But around that
Iron
time
Man was
frame.
also 2008. They were both
okay,
2008.
yeah. So right around that time frame, right? He subverts the trope. And then basically all of the almost all of the Marvel superheroes are like operating in the open, and when they're not, it's not like it's a the movie never really focuses on that, except for Spider-Man, right? Like Spider-Man has it, but it tends to not like focuses it on it in the. It focuses on it in the movies to a certain extent, but it's not like the focus. And then
Yeah, this is part of what I really liked about Far From Home, right? I talked about how that feels like a really true Spider-Man story to me, right? It just like hits on all the beats, and part of that is the tension between Peter Parker, teenager who wants to have fun, and Peter Parker, Spider-Man who wants to save lives, kind of thing. Which I think is kind of neat. And there's some movies that have touched on it in ways that I think are like fine or fun. Obviously, for instance, I like in Batman vs Superman, there's secret identity stuff because you have Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent meeting in a thing, like in like a party, right? And having that kind of we can't actually do this, but we like that's fun. That's like a clever use of a secret identity, but that's all ancillary, right? These are all sort of like orbiting the concept of a secret identity, not really actually about the core concept itself, which is what felt really sweet about all of the Gwen stuff happening right there on screen, right? And I just loved it.
yeah, no, it was. I thought like so I am not like, again, more about this stuff than I do. I didn't know about like Gwen's story where Peter becomes the reptile, right? That's like a variation on the reptiles what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, the lizard. Technically, by the way, I also did not know this stuff because Spider-Gwen is just I've never read that book. It's a little after my time, but I think it's a neat variation. Weirdly, I like the idea of, this is gonna sound fucked up, like Peter Parker school shooter. Like the idea that Peter Parker in a different sort of vein is actually a really depressed, troubled kid, right? There's something about that I just find really appealing, I guess. Kind of in like almost like an evil Superman way, right? In the same way that I find like evil like the Injustice story is compelling, right? I don't know. There's something about Peter Parker turns himself into a fucking supervillain.
Buddy, there is a comic by a notorious kind of alt-right guy online about across.
Is this Stone Toss?
Yes, it's Stone Toss.
Okay.
And it's about across the Spider-Verse. It says there's a black Spider-Man, and through a portal swings in a Spider-Man wearing a Confederate flag uniform. So I just, when you said school shooter Peter Parker, I just imagined Spider-Man swinging in wearing like a trench coat and like
Oh my god.
and like a fedora, right? Like,
I mean, there was a Spider-Man comic stopping a school shooter. That was like 20 years ago now.
yeah.
But I remember it being really like powerful at the time. It was during J. Michael Straczynski's. He had a really
Mm.
long, famous run with John Romita Jr. And they did a thing where Peter Parker became a math teacher at Midtown High. And one of his students came in and became a school shooter, and Spider-Man had to. It was like, oh, hit me. That like hits me where I live, right? Um, man, yeah. Anyway, so the Gwen stuff.
Yeah. What stuff was neat. Yeah.
Do you
well,
like the? Have you followed any of the conversation about the trans stuff?
I saw it. I kind of ignored it. Like,
I think it's I like it for a very dumb sort of reason, to be honest with you, which is sort of like baby's first subtext. Because I actually think that the argument works on that subtextual level. All of the colors, all of Gwen's colors are
sure.
like the colors of that we would associate with like the trans flag and stuff like that. And thematically, everything that she is doing is also intensely relatable, right? If you're like a trans person having a tough time kind of dealing with your parents, and I thought all of that stuff worked great, and it would have been ruined if they had said it, right? Because it would have kind of put too fine a
So,
button on it.
so this is the thing, right? Like, I think what you're pointing at is like Gwen doesn't have to be trans, right?
Mhm.
The way an allegory works is you don't actually have to be the thing, right? Like this is like,
Yeah.
this is like people talking about like, like, oh, the X-Men were always kind of woke. Sure, but like the point was that like it wasn't about the mutants being black, right? Like Storm was literally black, but that wasn't the point, right? It was an
Yeah.
allegory, right? Like so
No, I also think there's this whole other conversation about Spider-Verse that drives me wild, which is the people who have sort of taken it as a sort of an attack on like the concept of like fandom and like the sort of nature of superhero movies being based off of canon sort of source material, right? And people will get kind of up in arms about what is and isn't canon, and they'll like argue about this stuff. And I hate all these arguments. I think they're all so fucking stupid. Um, and to me, this is another version of that kind of an argument, right? It is not about the themes or the character underlying this stuff in terms of like an emotional sort of connection, right? It is not about connecting to Gwen the character and the trauma and the fight that she is making internally in order to overcome her issues, right? This is the stuff that I think is what is part and parcel of good storytelling, right? It is about answering the like definitive lore question like you're trying to assemble the Wikipedia page. Do you know what I mean?
yes, no,
It's
I
like
know exactly what you mean.
really missing the forest for really missing
This-
for the forest for the trees. Which is also how some people have talked about like how I even hate the way that some folks have said, I loved Across the Spider-Verse because it shut up stupid fanboys who just care about like canon and care about this stuff and shows that you can do stuff outside of canon with these stories or whatever. And it's just like, God, that like also is so dumb and kind of misses the point because like the point of to take the fanboy side for a second, the point of canon is to make those emotional moments, right? The yes, it is a canon thing where Miles sort of inadvertently learns that his uncle is the Prowler and kind of sort of causes his uncle's death, right? In the same way that Peter Parker causes Ben, like Uncle Ben's death. We would consider that a canon moment. And that's an important canon moment. It's not an important canon moment because like it sits in the timeline. It's an important canon moment because it's a really emotionally charged scene, right? Like I I think that that's the stuff that works and that matters. And that I'm sorry, I just read the chat. Everyone in chat, or I just wrote plot twist: Gwen's dad is the one who is trans. Coming this summer, Spider Verse trans cop dad. Oh my god. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, so it's like they're both kind of from this premise of the thing that matters is the lore, right? And keeping an accurate, meticulous set of notes about what actually happened, right? Whereas in my perspective, the reason that canon is important, or these character moments, this like this trans Gwen stuff is important, is because it helps impart the emotional kind of underpinning of this stuff. And I
Right.
feel like just really, I just feel like nerds don't want to talk about emotions. That's what
Yeah,
it
I mean
comes down to.
that is part of it, and like I understand the impulse to kind of like know the lore,
Mm.
but also like I mean, like I think you're ultimately right, like being like, well, that's not canon is just as bad as like, huh, that wasn't canon, huh, right? Like both
Yeah,
both sides of the same coin are like both bad, right? Like the story stands on
yeah,
its
because
own.
they're both accepting that
Yeah,
premise in my mind that I think
yeah,
is just like dumb. And it's like, what, this is the opposite of what we should be talking about when we talk about like movies or whatever.
right, yeah, yep. Um,
Trans cop Jack would be pretty funny.
uh,
I have to say, one other thing that I really enjoyed about the movie is I'd watch that show. True, me too. I would also watch that show. One other thing about the movie that I really enjoyed is all of the opening stuff. This is actually, I think, the unsung good stuff in Spider-Verse. I bet there was a temptation to cut a bunch of this, and I bet somebody at the studio gave a bunch of these notes like, let's get to the cool stuff, let's get to the Spider-Verse, let's get to, all of these crazy new Spider-Men showing up or whatever. That would have been so fucking stupid and bad, right? And is kind of the mistake that some of the other multiverse movies make, most notably Multiverse of Madness, right? Where it is it's a little too excited to do the fun and games of multiverse without properly setting up the characters, right? And kind of that emotional thematic underpinning that's happening kind of underneath, right? And all of the stuff with Miles and his dad and his mom. And I love that his mom got this big, kind of spotlight, and they had the party and the cakes and stuff like that. And the thing with the cakes was really funny. It's just like all that stuff, I think, is no one will talk about this except for me. Okay. But that is like the groundwork on which this being a good movie is sort of laid.
yeah, um, yeah. No, I mean, excuse me, sorry, turn my mouth. It's a good movie, right? Like I don't know if we got much else
Yeah, it's hard to talk about. Yeah, it's hard
yeah.
to talk about a good movie.
Yeah. Again, maybe just talk about these last couple things, the last couple of minutes. Bruce Lomé in the chat brings up that something about Donald Glover being Spider-Man or Miles, I guess, and then Brian Michael Bendis made Miles because he was known at the Backlash. Do you know anything about that stuff? You're more
uh
dialed into the comic stuff. Like I know at one point that Donald Glover was kind of like a dream cast for Miles, and he was pretty well foreshadowed as the Prowler in the Marvel movie in what was it, Far
and
From
he
Home?
shows up as the Prowler in this
Yeah,
movie,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
As being kind of contained or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I do know so the backlash about Brian Michael Bendis and Miles was around sort of Brian Michael Bendis ending the Ultimate Spider-Man run, which, to be fair, I also think was bullshit. I was part of that backlash, right? I grew up on that run, right? That was the first run of comics I ever read. I have every issue in a long box, like 20 feet behind me. Um, and it basically, what happened was Brian Michael Bendis got fed up with writing sort of teenage Peter Parker, and wanted to do something new, and so he kills teenage Peter Parker pretty abruptly, I would say. um and then moves over to Miles. This is not, the backlash is not about Miles. I'm actually fine. I actually, what, to be fair, I quite like Miles. I also have all of the Miles issues back there, right? But it is about killing Peter Parker as he existed in that incarnation, right? What I wanted, what everyone wanted, was just have Peter Parker stick around, like have him be around. Just have two fucking Spider-Man, right? Have Miles Morales, Ultimate Spider-Man, and Peter Parker, Ultimate Spider-Man, right? If you don't want to write it anymore, hand it off to another writer. That was the backlash at the time. This was like
Okay.
15 fucking years ago.
Yeah.
The Donald Glover stuff, it was before Tom Holland was cast. Glover wore Spider-Man pajamas in Community, so everyone started campaigning for him to be the new Spider-Man after Garfield. I also do remember this. I feel like that's probably not it's something that got factored into too much into a movie like this one, right? I think at the end of the day, they probably weren't thinking all that much around backlash and whether and making kind of comments on those sorts of I don't know, on those sorts of
Yeah,
things.
I mean, and if you want to take the most charitable interpretation, right? Like, we
Yep.
already have one character who is both the Prowler and Spider-Man, right? Like, nothing says that Donald Glover can't be a Spider-Man at some point, right? Can't be Miles.
True.
Um, that would be, yeah. No, I'm,
Yeah.
what was-
Anyway, I feel
yeah,
like that's enough. That's our Across the Spider-Verse hot takes.
yeah.
Um, what's been going on? How's your week, bud?
It's been good. Beyond, I've been playing Street Fighter. I've been playing Diablo. I'm like level 60 now.
Ooh, I've also been playing a lot of Diablo, though I have petered off a tiny little bit. I'm still level 82 or something, which I think is what I was last week. Maybe I'm 83 or 84 by now. I don't know.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Anything else significant on my side? I don't know. I've been rotating between Diablo and a little bit of WoW and Street Fighter, just because Street Fighter.
All of you talking about Street Fighter got me to play Soul Calibur 6 because Soul Calibur is my fighting game. And I bought it a long time ago and I never actually touched it. And I was like, let's dig in. And so I downloaded Soul Calibur 6. And I've been playing Mitsurugi because of course. I've not been playing Mitsurugi because the story mode. Soul Calibur has a really powerful character creation engine. So instead I made, say it with me, Chad, Shimada Kanbei.
Wow.
and you assign them a move set from one of the main characters, right? And so I gave him the Mitsurugi, samurai move set. And so I've just been playing Kanbei in, this sort of, honestly, it's kind of crazy. It's like a quasi RPG sort of thing. But the craziest thing, the nutsest thing is that I intuitively know how to play this character from Soul Calibur 2 20 years ago. Okay,
Yeah.
the moveset, I thought the moveset was going to change a lot, right? And there is some stuff that's different just because of the updates of how controllers and stuff worked. The modern controllers use different types of different types of inputs compared to what we used on the PlayStation 2. But basically the whole moveset is the exact same. And I was like, oh my God, I'm just doing everything I used to do back in those days, and it's just working. It's the exact same shit.
Yeah. That's the way it
Which is
goes.
yeah.
That's like pretty. That's like Street Fighter 6. Zangief has some new stuff, right? Has some slightly different stuff, but like most of it's the same thing as it was in 4. As the big change was they made a bunch of the rapid tap, like Blanka's electricity and Honda's 1000 hand slap. They made them quarter circle motions instead of like rapid taps, because I think that was like an accessibility concern. In addition to modern controls, so that's kind of the feeling, right? Like, go back, you can still mash out 360s, get your spinning pile drivers. It's fucking great. Because I think part of that's by design, right? Like, they want you who have if you're like a core player that's been playing for like 20 years, they don't want you to have to completely relearn they want that muscle memory to mostly continue over and put in some new things for some new inputs. But yeah, that's basically
Yeah,
it.
I mean, the funny thing, I honestly need to up the difficulty. The funny thing is that there, like I said, so it's an RPG sort of system, right? There's a whole map. You can explore stuff. There's random encounters or whatever. Because the move set, like the character creator is so robust, you're not fighting canon characters most of the time. You're fighting the kind of mooks with their move set, right? And but the crazy thing is that there's like levels, right? So my Kanbei is level 8. And I have a level 8 sword, and my level 8 sword has a little bit of crit on it, right? And does like a little bit of extra damage or whatever. But have been housing so hard just kind of on the fundamentals that I have from 20 years ago that like I keep getting random encounters. Like I got a random encounter with a level 27 bandit. And just because it's a fighting game and like you can block and parry and dodge things, right? And chain combos in order to kill guys. Like it took me forever to kill him, right? And every time he hit me, it chunked like half my health or whatever. But in 3 rounds, I was able to beat the level 27 guy just by being offensive and pretty good footsies with the computer, I guess, right? Which I thought was actually a pretty funny like limitation of the genre, right? When you give people sort of like a block button that reduces all damage taken, and the ability to execute big long chains that will do a bunch of guaranteed damage, right? All that stuff is interesting. The one, by the way, the one new addition to this, which does make a pretty big difference, is there are supers, which there were not in Soul Calibur 2. In Soul Calibur 2, you had kind of supers in the sense that you could do really powerful attacks that were unblockable damage, right? That you would do like a big lightning fire swing, and it was the kind of thing that you couldn't block, which was part of the meta, right? Like, so for instance, Astaroth had a lot of these. It is hard to be defensive against Astaroth because he has that big giant great axe, and if you're sitting there and you're just blocking and parrying shit, he's gonna punish the fuck out of you because he has a million of these like lightning moves. But now there are true supers that you can like build to, and they do stuff, which is sort of neat.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. Street Fighter, the new Street Fighter actually has a world tour, which is basically it has a character creator, and you fight mooks, and you actually get to mix and match moves, but you have to like build it up. Like I haven't played a ton of it, but like I have Luke's core
Oh,
set
okay.
with like some of Chun-Li's stuff in there. Um, uh, because those are the first two that you meet, but like you have random encounters too. It's kind of derpy, but like I don't know if it's so much a limitation of the genre as it is kind of like just like a way of like limitation implies it's negative, right? Like Dark Souls, you can play that game at level 1 and you can dodge
Yep.
every attack, right? Like, so I think like it's part of the design, of it, right? Like it's skill based rather than purely numbers based, which is neat. Yeah. But yeah. I am back on my weapon switching build in Diablo.
Ooh.
I'm effectively too high level for or too well geared for like tier 3, but way too low level for tier 4. Like I hit level 60 and I had done some runs with Friend of the Cast Monic where he basically killed everything, and I picked up some ancient stuff, like a couple pieces that were better than what I had. And so I was like, oh, I hit level, but they bottom out at level 60. So like, oh, I hit level 60. Maybe I can do tier 4 now. And I went into tier 4 and I immediately died. So, I'm back on tier 3. So, that's not as like, that's a good game to listen to podcasts to, but it's not like, I don't
Yep.
find it particularly compelling as like an actual game. Like when I want to concentrate on like game, I play Street Fighter, or Estrella, but again, I can't talk too much about that. But it's
Soon we will
yeah,
have our Faded Estrella podcast. I'm very excited, but
yeah.
soon.
I it's it's a I like Estrella, and that's about
Oh god.
yeah. No, I mean,
Um Yeah, I feel that. I feel you. Yeah, it's Diablo is very much like that. I'm off my weapon switching build, funnily enough. I have this like kind of doomer moment a little bit. Like I'm in like the 40s right now in terms of nightmare sigils. Which I feel pretty good because I'm doing this homebrew, right? And a lot of my friends are also in the 40s, but they're in there with like very like I would call it meta builds, right? And I have this sort of homebrew build that I think um is fun and interesting. And it's satisfying that I was able to kind of like get there on my own kind of thing. But I eventually swapped off of weapon switching because I got a really good hammer. I got an 820 ancestral mace with good rolls, basically, right? And I was like, I have to use this, right? 820 is the maximum item level, something like that, getting good rolls. It's like getting best in slot in WoW kind of thing. And so I pulled off the pieces of my gear that were built for weapon switching, and I instead refocused my gear on two-handed mace, so I'm just using bash, hammer of the ancients, and doing overpower stuff because bash has a thing where if you crit 4 times, your next core skill overpowers. So it's like crit, 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 hammer of the ancients does like 1.5 million damage, just one shot, which is really satisfying. But also, it is hard to live. There's a lot of times where I'm dying just to like dumb stuff because it's hard. It's hard at that level, right? There's a lot of damage coming your way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I got a legendary that gives like my weapon mastery abilities a second charge. And just makes Death Blow so much more usable.
Oh my
Uh,
god, yeah, I know the exact one you're talking about. It's real good.
yeah. Because I can be off a little bit and then I just like use it again and it gets the kill. And it's great. But yeah, no, I mean it's mindless fun, but it's not particular. I am anticipating going back to Tears of the Kingdom sometime soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am anticipating playing season 1. My goal is to get to level 100 before season 1 begins. And then I don't know what I'll do for season 1. There's a part of me, I know that in season 1 they're adding a bunch of new items and shit, and I'm
Are they?
kind of on board for that.
I am too.
Yeah, the idea is apparently they're going to switch up the meta because they're going to change the uniques. It's my understanding. I could be wrong. But they're going to change the uniques, so there won't be the uniques that we have in the game now. There's going to be new uniques. So hopefully, that will make stuff kind of cool and interesting. I don't love the way that any of the classes work except for Barbarian and Lightning Sorcerer. Lightning Sorcerer has been a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of that. But it's not good apparently, and also the way everybody's like building their sorcerers is like the exact opposite of the way I want to build my sorcerer. I literally just want to like almost be a Vorthos. I just want to put lightning in all of my skill slots and just do lightning, please. Right. But I don't know. I'm told that's not amazing. Which I guess fair enough. That sucks. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So
yeah. Something I want to do. Oh, Lou in the chat says power level me, buddy. Lou, you should join the Derp clan. We can play together. Something I want to do is I want to replay through BioShock Infinite because I watched a video this last night, I think, about how like it didn't hold up on replay, and I've heard like I enjoyed it when I played it, and then all the discourse I've heard since has been like it's actually not very good, and I kind of want to replay it with some like critical distance, and we've been doing this podcast for 5 years,
like book report it, right?
Yeah,
we play it, and then I'm kind of down for that. I did not like it when I first played it, to be honest with you. I thought it was bad, but
yeah, my hot take. And it's not, or my suspicion, it's not a hot take yet because I can't substantiate it, but everybody complains about basically the kind of like the fact that like the uprising, like the rebellion turns evil when you switch dimensions or whatever, right? Like that was like a plot point. And everybody's like, that doesn't make any sense. And my memory of it, which isn't great, granted, was that like it was kind of like a standard kind of like person's kind of like a product of their opportunities, not necessarily of their like character, right? Like like it's like Daisy Fitzpatrick, that's her, something like that, right? Like
yeah, she's gonna kill the kid, and that's it. I remember thinking that was like cheap, but whatever.
Right, but like the idea that throughout history, like revolutionaries against like the upper class turn out to be pretty shitty people, pretty consistent theme, right? And I remember kind of like thinking about it in those terms at the time, but I'd like to go back and see it just to like make sure that take is correct. Maybe it's not, maybe it is bad, but like my
thing with BioShock Infinite honestly had very little to do with that. It was mostly about it was about like the combat design, right? The thing I loved about the original BioShock was I felt like it was a really fun playground to be in, right? And you were doing all of the normal stuff. You were doing boss fights, you're doing whatever, but like I had a completely different build than everyone else I knew because my thing was about enrage, right? There was one ability you could throw like a little ball at someone, if you got the ball on them, they just went fucking ape shit and they attacked everybody else kind of around them, right? So I was doing very stealth stuff, very enraged stuff or whatever. And I felt like my issue with BioShock Infinite was there was nothing like that, right? It was just gun corridor, basically, right? You know, cool guns, shoot with cool guns. So I felt like they had taken what is essentially would have been like an immersive sim is probably the genre that I would call this, right? Like something like Deus Ex, or like, you know, any of these
System
like
Shock,
Thief, yeah,
right?
System
It's just
Shock,
like
any of the yeah, these kinds of games, and sort of moved it fully into first person shooter.
yeah, and
Um,
Bioshock was definitely a step along with that access, right? Like
yeah,
from
yeah,
that makes
yeah.
sense.
And so, yeah, I mean, there were my bread and butter in BioShock 1 was stealthing around and throwing enraged globs at big daddies and just kind of letting them kill everything for me, right? You know, and anyway, and so when I played BioShock Infinite, you know, that was most of my I didn't like a lot of the story stuff that was happening kind of in Infinite. Um, but I really honestly don't know that I could articulate why. I remember there being a lot of really beautiful moments, I guess.
Yeah,
I would say to give that, you know, the game kind of its credits, right? There's the part where the handyman was also just intensely disappointed by because they're supposed to be like big daddies, but they're essentially not. There's this part where the handyman is on a stage kind of being gawked at, and he's having this moment of like, oh my god, I've turned myself into this monster. Like that moment really sat with me. There's a moment where I think it's Elizabeth sings with like a group of black servants in like a, you know, one of these, you're going through these like servant tunnels that are like gross and decrepit because, you know, it's obviously the facade of Columbia versus what it would actually sort of end up being. And the in those tunnels, um the there's just like a moment where there's a bunch of guys with a guitar, there's like doing a little thing, and then I remember because Elizabeth is like a companion, but I remember this thing, you walk into the room and she stops following you and she starts walking over to them. I was like, oh, what's this? And then she like sings a little song. I was like, this is transcendent, I love this, right? You know, but I don't know, like moments like that are great, but they're never going to save a game,
yeah. No,
right?
I mean, so part of it I think is also in the rearview mirror, right? Like, you know, things that are, this is a thing you talk about, right? Like, you know, things that come after always are more likely to be better than the things that came before.
Yep.
And something I remember is that Elizabeth was like the first of the kind of like companions that you didn't have to worry about like shepherding, right? Like, and that was like, I know that was like a big thing. Like when they were previewing, it's like, oh, is she going to be a problem? It's like, oh no, you just don't worry about her. And basically every game since has followed that model. And so like, you know, somebody pointed, like the video I was watching pointed out that like, you know, Last of Us comes out in the same year later in the year, and maybe we remember Bioshock Infinite as fondly if, you know, Last of Us had come out first, because like Ellie's better than Elizabeth, which I could buy that, right? Like I really like Last of Us 1. So, you know, but yeah, no, I'm interested in going back and just trying it out, just, you know, to see, because so part of it too is like I didn't play a ton of Bioshock 1, right? Like I never really went in super for horror games, and Bioshock 1 definitely had like a lot of horror elements to it, right? Whereas Infinite was like you said, it like part of it being like a very much runner and gunner game was also that it was like a lot cleaner, a lot brighter, a lot less horror elements. And you know, it was pretty. Although, as much as I can recall, neither game was very subtle, which like, you know, it's like, you know, it's like a South Park without the humor, right? Like, you know, like they named like part of what like escaped me at the time was that like they named the man fucking Comstock, right? Like I didn't know that like that was a thing beforehand, right? But like, you know, it's like at least they had the common decency to like make Andrew Ryan an anagram, right? Like
What is what should I know about Comstock?
it's like it's
Is it something that I don't know?
yeah, like Anthony Comstock is the guy. It's like it's basically what Zachary Comstock is, like very like
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
very like
Okay.
Christian, very religious, very censorship focused, like very kind of like idealized, you know, world in that kind of way. And so like a Comstock is a term, right? Like, you know, like or Comstockian, that kind of thing, right? I didn't know that at the time. Now I do, and it's like, wow, they are like like I said, at least they had the common decency to make Andrew Ryan an anagram, right? Like,
Oh my God, he died in Summit, New Jersey.
did he?
Do you know Summit? Summit was very near to Maplewood.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar. The other aspect of this podcast, New Jersey lore.
Yeah, true. New Jersey lore. Let's go. Yeah, wow.
Uh,
I guess he lived in Summit. Look at this. Okay, this is super interesting. I've never heard of this before, but I also totally get it.
he opposed obscene literature, abortion, contraception, masturbation, gambling, prostitution, and patent medicine.
Medicine. It's like a joke. It's, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like a list of a bunch of things you would expect, and then something is like wild.
Yeah. But yeah. Otherwise, this week, you know, what else? But the AC in my house is out, which has been a constant source of worry for me. So I had to like drive to Costco and pick up an AC unit. But you know, that's like home improvement problems, not like game related stuff. Did I read anything interesting? Not in particular in our kind of like genre of things. What about you? What else have you done with your week? Lucy in the chat, New England has this heat. Yes, it is like 85 degrees today. It gets hot in the summer.
I've returned to Hearthstone a little bit. I just wanted to clip off the battle pass, which I never got around to. I never finished a push to legend, which I wish I had sort of done it, but I was playing my old weapon control warrior deck, and unfortunately it's just not meeting the mark, which mostly seems to be a result of the meta sort of like shifting away from these sorts of like creature based sort of swarm decks that I could really prey upon with weapon stuff, and it's you know, it's just like later game value stuff. But there's a new enraged warrior deck that's pretty fun, so it's kind of what I'm doing. It's kind of what where I'm at a little bit. The other thing that I've been playing is Minecraft. When was the last time you played Minecraft? It must have been in college, right?
I played a little bit post college, but like not in like years. Last
Okay, yeah,
Minecraft
I also
related
have
thing.
not played. I also have not played Minecraft in years. I haven't played Minecraft since I was working at Square Enix. This is the big thing. And there's a lot different about Minecraft now. There's like new enemies and shit like that, but it also kind of strikes me that it is kind of the same at the same time. Like if I were to think of a game that's a 13-year-old darling indie game that got sold to Microsoft for $2 billion, I would have expected there to be more kind of content updates, but like really just seems to amount to there's copper now. Oh, you can find different little rocks underground. There's basalt and amethyst, you know, in caverns. It's just like it's like stuff like that, right? Which has been pretty neat, but also fun and also like cathartic. I basically spent most of the weekend just like sitting and mining and building a thing, and just like the inherent fun of doing something like that in Minecraft is a, you know, it's a good time. I don't know, I'm trying to think. Did I watch anything that was like that was cool or that was crazy? Oh, I've started watching Peacemaker. Wow, but I can't. I'm not going to talk about it because you should watch it. Peacemaker is pretty great though. At least the first 3 episodes, which is what I've seen.
Yeah, no, it's on the list.
I went back. I decided to watch James Gunn's Suicide Squad, which holds up beautifully. I remember really liking that movie, and it was satisfying to go back and watch it and be like, damn, yeah, this is the shit. Peacemaker is an interesting, fun, you know, follow up to that actually has like a lot of heart. Like John Cena is pretty good. I don't know. There was a lot. There was a lot there. Is it because you're shrouded in darkness?
No,
Is that why you got up?
No, I forgot to turn over my overhead light, and those lights, which are too far away for me to get to. But I forgot. I picked up something earlier today to return to a long absent segment, which is trying weird Coke flavors. This is the League of
Oh
Legends
yes.
XP Plus flavor, which I will try live on camera for us. I believe I did the Dream flavor and like the Starry flavor previously. It appears that XP Plus is lemon. Or something vaguely citrusy. Oof. All right, I threw up a little in my mouth just from the name of that Coke. I don't ever want to taste League of Legends.
You know, it's funny. We were talking about, we were talking about doomed boats last week. Wait, I'm sorry. I talked about doomed boats last week.
Yes,
right?
we talked about Doom Boats for a while last week.
Okay, good. I've talked a lot about doomed boats over the last week, right? And so I've had this conversation about a million times. But like, the thing about doomed boats that's so satisfying is the like connotation, right? Which is why eagles in a nest on a mountain in Southern California can be doomed boats, even though they're not boats. um, but the it's like the connotation of the word, right? It's something nobody ever thinks about or talks about, but a lot of the times, like there are conversations, like that will revolve entirely around words having connotations on top of their definitions, but like nobody wants to like acknowledge that. Like, so for instance, uh, wait, did I talk about the abortion debate that I watched?
No.
Okay, I watched a 4-hour abortion debate. It was very stupid, but there's just like one thing that was stupid and bothered me, which was there was this moment during the debate where essentially the pro-lifers were saying life starts at conception. The pro-choice person on the debate was saying life starts at consciousness, right? When we talk about what we are protecting when we are protecting a human life, what it means to have personhood, right? Is to protect that consciousness. And there were all of these semantic arguments about what does consciousness mean, right? That were just all about like connotation, essentially, right? Like one of the pro-lifers was like, oh, does that mean if I go into a coma you could just kill me because I'm not conscious anymore? And it's like, no, you fucking moron. It's not the word there. The word conscious means two different things, right? There are two definitions to this word, and you're substituting one for the other because you can't see through, right? Like what we're actually talking about when we talk about consciousness, which is maybe like, I don't even know, like sapience or whatever is maybe what you would kind of call it.
I
like
mean, so that's like debate tactic stuff, right? Like I know it's constantly getting darker in here because I can barely see myself.
Yeah, you really are. Yeah. Anyway, the connotation of this is the League of Legends flavor is pretty god awful because I have very low. When I think of what are some of the flavors of League of Legends, I'm thinking of
Salt.
like sweaty back sweat in a gamer chair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Salt.
Yeah. Like.
Like
I'm thinking like spittle of an angry guy yelling at his screen as it's like dripping down the monitor.
so, our friend of the cast, Barry, used to drink a drink called Pocari Sweat, and it's just like a sports drink. But like that is what I imagine that tastes like before I tried it. Is like what I imagine this. So I want to revise. It doesn't taste quite like lemon. It tastes like lemon candy, like a lemon drop. So you put like that in my Coke.
Okay, interesting.
For reference, I got this from the Aldi, which usually carries like overstocked stuff. So I don't think this was a very popular flavor. So
We are big fans of we're big fans of Aldi. To bring it back to some derps talk about food. Okay.
yeah, the alternate, the multiverse of some derps, right?
Yeah, the alternate. Yeah, for real. True.
But yes, oh man, I do. So in kind of that vein, I like Google Play Store had like a promotion where like if you played this like Mobile Legends game for a little while, you get like 100 points. It's like $1 worth of stuff. I was like, I'll give it a shot, and it like wasn't super good, but it made me want to play League of Legends. I haven't, but it made me want to play it. You know,
Dark thoughts.
yeah.
For a man shrouded in darkness.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. I could see myself going back if there was like a group of people that went back to it, but I just don't think it's gonna happen. And I kind of don't want it to happen either. Like,
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think it's true for all these games, right? Like the only reason I went back to Overwatch, for instance, was because we did it as like a group, and you follow these like ebbs and flows, these kinds of shifting tides, right? Of sorts of whatever game we're playing, whether that's Diablo, whether that's WoW. I'm very off WoW right now. You know, my friend Stoops, her subscription ran out, and she was like, I'm just not going to re-up until the new patch, 10.1.5, which drops next week, I think.
oh really?
Yeah. And so it's just like, wow, there's not really a reason to be going on to WoW. We're all playing Diablo together and also a little Minecraft together. It's like, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Very cool. Yeah. I've also got like other stuff that I do with my time, which is, I've been getting into woodworking stuff, which has been fun. But like,
Oh my god.
yeah,
Like the Ron Swanson mustache, getting into woodworking. This is really your goal, isn't it? Let's be real.
Yeah, not quite, but like, So the thing that I want to do is I want to build a fight box that I've made the box myself out of like wood and made it nice and like done nice joinery on it. But like, there's I built the planter for outside, and now I need to build a crosscut sled. That way I can use my table saw and not kill myself when I'm doing crosscuts. And then after I do that, I can start to put together the box. And I'm ordering parts. Like I ordered a bunch of buttons off of AliExpress, right? Because like I think I've shown my suitcase. Suitcase works great, right? My suitcase hitbox, but it is rough around the edges. I drilled it with a hand drill. It is not particularly stable, so I would like to make myself a better one. But yes, so like I've been reading and watching lots of YouTube videos about like I can see myself slowly turning into my father, which is like watches a bunch of like YouTube or woodworking videos or like TV shows is what my dad would have done. Doesn't actually do a lot of woodworking, like and the chat rise says I'm the Babadook right now, so I will. I'll remember to turn the lights on next time.
It has been a very slow process if we were to like look at the beginning and the end of the podcast, so it's pretty funny.
Yeah, well, it's because the sun's setting, right? Like,
yeah. Okay, well, I got nothing else, so I guess that's a good place to end it. We will end on time for once in our fucking lives. We won't go over by like 45 minutes.
And before I backing into my screen, I was like, can I like get all the way into darkness for the end of the podcast? If you would like to send us anything that you want to tell us about this podcast, anything we talked about in this podcast, you can visit DerpsPlayGames@gmail.com or podcast@DerpsPlayGames.com. You can follow us twitch.tv/SomeDerpsPlayGames or youtube.com/@SomeDerpsPlayGames. You can rate and review us wherever you find podcasts. All links in the description. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
I have nothing else I'm looking to promote. Oh my god, I do have something I want to promote, which is I'm doing speedruns this week.
Ooh.
On Friday. The official Akupara stream is actually not going to be on Akupara Games. It's going to be on there's a big Rain World speedrunning event going on. And they were like, wouldn't it be funny if one of the devs wanted to do a speedrun? And we were like, yeah. So I'm doing Rain World speedruns on Friday. We're gonna see how it goes.
How active is that community?
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
The Rain World speedrun community.
How accurate?
Active.
Oh, active. I don't know, pretty active.
So the reason I am asking is because Summoning Salt just released another hour-long video on like, the last 2 years of like a Mario Kart full circuit thing. Let's get the worst dev at Rain World to speedrun it. So I was like, my immediate thought was like, you guys should pitch, like you should like sponsor an episode of Summoning Salt on the history of Rain World speedrunning. I don't know if there's enough there to do a bit on it, but like, just because like I eat those videos up, right? Like I don't play any of these games. I will sit there and watch an hour and be like, yes.
The 80%, so the 80% for Rain World, the thing I know about the Rain World speedruns, the 80% for Rain World is like 15 minutes. So the ending percent right now on the Survivor is 14 minutes and 11 seconds. I guess we'll see if I'm anywhere good enough for this.
Are you gonna do a test run? Are you gonna prep it all?
I am gonna prep. I'm gonna try and beat the game this week. I'm gonna beat the game because I've actually technically never beaten the game. I've explored a bunch, I've gone everywhere or whatever, but I've never like actually just sort of like followed the objectives of the game to go from point A to point B. And so we're gonna try.
Do you
We're gonna
you know
try
what
that.
do you know what the deets are? Is like, are there like significant glitches in
My expectation is that I'm not actually going to use any glitches. The way these speedrunners do it, actually, is they purposefully die.
mm,
Um,
to like reset?
the speedrun basically says you go to one end of the map in a single what's called a cycle in Rain World, right? Like a single day kind of thing. You can actually do that you can do that in a speed run in one cycle. You can go all the way to one side of the map, and then you tactically die so that you start back at the beginning and then you go to the other side of the map, and that's how you do the speed run.
Very cool. Very, very cool.
So yeah.
All right. Well, tune into that if you're interested. And with that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.
As I disappear into the darkness.